In an affluent part of rural suburbia, Chris looms over his seemingly picturesque family life with 2 daughters, a son and a devoted wife, a pillar of the community, and viewed as a reliable source of support. This illusion of the perfect nuclear family is dismantled when Chris discovers a feral woman living in the wild, kidnapping her, locking her within the family cellar, supposedly intending to socialise her into wider society. The longer we spend around Chris, however, we and his family learns that this was never his intention. This is Lucky McKee's The Woman, a collaborative adaptation between McKee and extreme horror novelist Jack Ketchum, based on their novella of the same name. The Woman retains McKee's morbid irony present in his cult classic May, and while some of the 90s inflected alt-rocker inspiration slips its way into this film, The Woman also explores the cruel impact of voyeurism, patriarchal violence, and its ongoing cyclical influence firmly established by those that enable it. Before delving further into the adaptation of The Woman, it's worth spending time to acknowledge the disturbing legacy of Jack Ketchum, the film's co-screenwriter and co-author of the source material. While not as prominently successful as horror contemporaries such as Stephen King or Clive Barker, Jack Ketchum is often celebrated within extreme horror and splatterpunk circles for his unflinching ability to depict chilling violence without losing a sense for social commentary. The Woman has traces of Ketchum's most recognisable novel, The Girl Next Door, the book being a more realistic tale of violence, retelling the disturbing events of the murder of Sylvia Likens. Within the book, systems of abuse are enabled within a society willing to turn its head away from the red flags, a nonchalance towards misogynistic violence hidden underneath a veneer of suburbanite politeness. Much like The Girl Next Door, The Woman is also unshrinking in its depiction of extreme violence. The significant difference is that The Woman feels more satiric, but the traces of The Girl Next Door lingers within this film still. While not as nuanced or as iconic as David Lynch's own takedowns of suburbia, The Woman certainly reflects on the darkness hidden by suburban facade. There are stringent rules here to benefit those within the white picket fence-like community. Anything remotely different is to be challenged, repressed, and maybe even tortured into a sense of acceptability. Chris's main declaration as to why he kidnaps the nameless wild woman from her forest dwelling, punctuated with an ominous sense of irony, such as the arrival of a schoolteacher concerned for Chris's daughter Peggy's well-being, completely unaware of the terrible violence that unfolded in the very next room. Underneath, nearby the pristine cleanliness and appearance of politeness, The Woman suggests that's where the darkest secrets are kept. Voyeurism is an aspect of The Woman worth acknowledging too. Chris's son, Brian, has a morbid curiosity for his father's private actions, watching his dad take sexual advantage of the nameless woman locked in their cellar through a makeshift peephole. Brian is a voyeur, an example of how Chris's patriarchal violence is inherently cyclical, as Brian eventually mimics his father's sexual violence with his own brutal masturbatory fantasy involving pliers. Brian sees his father as an authority figure, a pillar of the community, and therefore accepted even in his most savage desires. The enabling of such violence is an influence on Brian, which stems from his voyeurism. Not only is Brian and Chris's dysfunctional bond a reflection of the continuation and nurturing of patriarchal abuse, but the voyeurism itself is a mirror to the viewer's own passive participation in these scenes. How different are we from Brian if we share a similarly gruesome curiosity to see what extent McKee's film goes into its brutality? We, like Brian, become the voyeurs. We should condemn the male-led violence depicted within the film. The film itself certainly does with its chaotic climax, but do we become passive enablers by viewing what unfolds? Patriarchal oppression is the key motif within The Woman, a film that suggests the image of civility is a hoax if it's to hide the murderous intent lingering underneath. Chris displays a cruel satisfaction in the suffering of women, overstepping consensual boundaries and resorting to displays of aggressive violence to resolve any disagreements with his wife Belle or daughter Peggy. In a display of satiric exaggeration, not necessarily comedic, Chris's controlling actions over his wife and children is the method of upholding a sense of female obedience within a male-dominated household, and by extension, a male-dominated society. Chris refuses to view women as people, a dehumanizing amplification of how it feels to become the victim of misogynistic violence. by the film's splatterpunk-inspired conclusion, full of vile practical effects-laden body horror and hidden secrets finally coming to the light, we can't exactly blame the nameless woman for retaliating in the way she finally does. In conclusion, Lucky McKee's and Jack Ketchum's adaptation of their novella, The Woman, is a brutal experience, but also a devilish takedown of the privileged suburbia that hides the continuation of societal misogynistic violence. With a sense of bitter satire, The Woman is a film that demonstrates the destructive nature of misogyny, and how, during its climactic sequence, unity amongst women and girls can become a source of defiance in tackling a patriarchal world intent on dehumanization. It's not a subtle approach to storytelling, but sometimes subtlety should be bludgeoned in favour of maximalism to get the message across loud and clear. A special thank you to my incredible tier Patreon supporter Gil, and my super tier Patreon supporters Constantine Bombelli, Jamie, and Anthony Orr.